I want to say a shout out to Tal for work on getting all the images together for the different libraries that are represented in our conference. Uh, so in this session, we wanted to have a panel discussion on how different libraries address the pandemic at the beginning and during, and how we're moving forward into the new normal. We want to thank those who are willing to participate in the discussion, and I will ask each one of them to state their name and give a brief introduction, after which we will begin with the first question. Deyse, I'll ask you to start us off, please.
Hi, my name is Deyse Bravo, and I am the library director at McKee Library on the campus of Southern Adventist University in Collegedale, Tennessee.
Great. Stuart? You're muted, Stuart.
I was just doing that to make everybody comfortable.
That's right.
So my name is Stuart Gaetjens. I'm the technical services coordinator at Tennessee Tech University.
Thank you. Andrea?
Hello, I'm Andrea Kincaid. I'm the lead public services librarian at the Augusta R. Colwick Library on the campus of Chattanooga State Community College.
Thank you. Michael?
Hi, I'm Michael Jones. I'm chair of the Access Services Committee at Vanderbilt, and I'm also circulation coordinator at the Ann Potter Wilson Music Library.
Thank you. And finally, Daniel.
I'm a Primo administrator at UK, and I deal with a lot of things that it talks to, and I help with all administration. And before that, I spent 10 years at a branch library doing fulfillment and public service.
Great. Well, again, thank you everyone for participating. And here's the first question. At the beginning of the pandemic, when lots of businesses were shutting down, what was your library's decision on opening or closing? How do you feel when the library is forced to open or close its doors to its users? Stuart, we'll start out with you.
Sure. Well, I think like many libraries, the library didn't have much input into this decision. It was made by higher level administrators. In the case of Tennessee Tech, the upper administration decided that the library would remain open. We never closed. But we did cut back all services. So basically all we were offering were computers and Wi-Fi. We closed off the third floor, so we did not offer circulating books. We did not circulate books. We didn't do interlibrary loan, no reference, those kinds of things. We kept the doors open, and that was it. A recent study that a colleague and I did showed that we only have that our researchers use about 3.7% of their materials are physical materials from our library. So I didn't feel too bad about not being able to offer those physical resources since our students and faculty use predominantly our electronic resources.
Great, thank you. Andrea.
So as Stuart said, that decision wasn't really left up to us. It was more an admin decision, but we did have, the decision-making power about what to do in our space. So the most essential need, especially for our students and especially at a community college, was tech. So similar to Stuart, we closed off our collections and we closed off our collaborative study areas. But we did leave our computer lab totally open so that students could come in and use our computers and use technology and print and all of that. We did have students that were attending classes via Zoom or Teams or whatever. So they would come into the library to attend their classes virtually. And again, at the beginning, of course, it was kind of shocking because our college wasn't residential, so I wasn't sure if we would really have to close or not. But we did go home for about 2 weeks, and then we came back in and set up the library to be safe for the people that needed to come in and use our computers.
Great, thank you. Michael.
So like everybody else, we had to really pivot hard to the use of electronic resources. we also, we had to leverage live answers and really work on, I think a lot of places had been talking about chat reference for years, but they hadn't really dived in. So we needed to dive in almost immediately. There were lots of requests from faculty members who didn't necessarily have laptops. So as soon as we were able, we had to use our existing inventory to get those laptops to teachers so they could teach. And as faculty members were completely reimagining their courses, we had to really use Leganto heavily and really rely on interlibrary loan to find those libraries that could help us out whenever we couldn't get something electronically.
Thank you. Daniel?
Yeah, it was pretty wild. Our administration at the campus level kind of started to indicate that they were thinking they would shift to online instruction after spring break. This would have been 15, 16 days ahead at that point. And then within 48 hours, everybody was working from home and buildings were closed. I just, yeah, word came from on high and moved really quickly. And I don't normally do a lot of AV support in my current work, but since I have a background in it, I was helping our IT team scramble to get all the equipment we could pull out of drawers and teach people remote desktop and Zoom and help them log in. And we were fortunate. I think we were able to cover all of our colleagues, but that was pretty wild. And our building is one of the top 3 kind of student congregation spaces on campus. It was wild to see it just sit empty, so suddenly.
Yeah.
I was just, yeah, it was got just a blur in hindsight now.
Mhm. Great. And Daisy?
So after spring break, our whole campus shut down. The students were sent home, and so the library was closed. Thankfully, we've always had a strong digital presence, so we were able to offer most of our services online. So there were still reference sessions, instruction sessions held on Zoom. The embedded librarian program actually grew from COVID because professors integrated themselves into that program when they realized we weren't going to be physically present. Lending for ILL shut down, but we were still borrowing electronic resources that way. And if students were in the area and they needed a book, one of us would come into the library maybe once a week or something and check out the book for them. And if they were far away and they really needed a resource that we only had in print, which was rare, we were able to scan maybe an excerpt as long as it was within fair use regarding copyright. We were able to do that. And so that's how we handled it until actually the fall semester. We stayed closed that whole time, just working from home.
Thank you. Next question. What are the most urgent needs of the library and library users at the beginning of the pandemic? How did your institution respond to those needs? And how did library staff respond? How would library administrators and your group leader respond? And this time we'll start with Andrea.
Okay, awesome. So again, our most urgent need for our users at the beginning of the pandemic was technology. So we did, our IT department on campus did loan out laptops to students, which was great. A lot of them still needed like Wi-Fi and internet access. We have rural users. We have people who don't have access to internet at home. So there were some Wi-Fi hotspots set up on campus. But again, we kept our computer lab open in the library so that students could come in and use it. Then there were also students who had never attended an online class. They had only ever done in person. So they needed assistance in how to access Zoom, how to use a headset. We did order about 100 headsets with microphones to accommodate our students who were taking classes in the computer lab. But a lot of them did not know how to navigate a learning management system or any of that. So they really needed a lot of one-on-one close help, which was unnerving during the pandemic, but we did not have a lot of students in here at one time. And we did, set up social distancing with the computers. We had barriers that were set up around each computer to try to help keep people safe. We even set up a cup system. So if a computer was in use, we would take off the green cup and the red cup would show. And then when the student left, then we would know that that station needed to be cleaned. So we were doing a deep clean on each station after every student used it. The most urgent needs for staff was technology at home. We only had 4 laptops in the library. So we didn't have enough to cover all staff. I ended up going to buy a new laptop. I hadn't bought one in a very long time. So it was about time to go ahead and get a new one. But some of our staff took their office workstation home and had to have a VPN set up. Another thing that we needed was a regular means of contact between staff. So we had always used LibChat, but we I set up a schedule so that there would always be 2 people staffing the chat for the hours that we were open on chat. And we used the internal queue on our library chat to kind of keep in contact with one another. And we even set up another queue that we called the water cooler. So if people just wanted to drop in and have, our usual, I'm walking from my office to the kitchen, chit chat, we could do that in the water cooler. So yeah.
Yeah, great. Michael.
Again, there was a heavy reliance on electronic reserves, so we had to do a lot of scanning. The first staff into the library were there to pretty much use the copy scanner to get everything that was needed for courses. In addition to laptops coming from a music library, where we check out microphones, which are really kind of scary to clean, and podcasting equipment, things like that. We had to learn how to clean it really quickly and to follow those CDC guidelines. We were a part of HathiTrust ETAS, but we did our best to have accurate sort of holdings in our catalog, but sometimes HathiTrust didn't cooperate fully in OCLC. So we really had to sort of negotiate what was possible with our users. And coming from a discipline where electronic access wasn't always the best, we had to treat every question like a reference question, sort of see what they really need, and really seek out what will work for them in that moment. Later on, we had to develop a pickup service really quickly, and Keegan talked about that yesterday. I think that's it for me.
Okay, great. Daniel.
Yeah, from my outside perspective, I'd swear our ER folks were working around the clock those first couple of weeks, keeping up with all the platforms that were opening up their content because of the circumstances, and just adding new things. And and we did have some course reserve materials that our acquisitions folks had to scramble and acquire electronic book copies of, just because the instructors were still trying to keep to their syllabi as best they could out of the circumstances, and reading materials that they expected to find at the library, because everything just suddenly became unavailable. And we were pretty fortunate that I'd already been working on implementing the public domain version of Hotkey in February anyway, and it was easy to adapt it over to grab that. And it was the numbers were amazing. We easily restored access to about half of our physical collections that were trapped inside buildings thanks to the Hotkey stuff. And so that was really useful too. And then some of our other goals were, once we realized that nobody was going to be able to get into our buildings, we tried to come up with every single reason anybody from the public would need to come into our buildings. We pushed all our due dates on into August, like across the board, not just books, but locker keys, DVDs, all kind of random things. And just tried to think of any excuse somebody would try to need to visit campus to keep them from having to do it. It's kind of to show that not only were they unable to, but we were also trying to think of them and accommodate them. You know, since we couldn't let them in, we wanted to offer them a useful alternative.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Daisy.
I would say the most urgent needs for our communities at the beginning of the pandemic were access to our resources and access to ourselves as librarians and helpers. So regarding our resources, we made everything available digitally that we could. Like I mentioned in the first question, if there was something that they couldn't access because it was a print material, we would either get it to them and they could meet us here, or we would scan an excerpt for them, or we would find an alternative that they could use that would satisfy the same reason that they needed. Regarding access to us, they were still able to meet one-on-one with librarians via Zoom. Instruction sessions still happened. Embedded librarian service still happened. We have a chat service that is kind of a triage method where student workers usually respond first, and any general questions that they can handle, they respond. And if it's more research-based, they pass it on to one of us. But obviously when the campus shut down, we had no more student workers. And so what we did was make a schedule. So for every time or for the hours of the day that the library would be open, we scheduled ourselves for those hours. And so we took on shifts from home for chat. And we were contacted by our students and our professors that way, as well as email, et cetera. As far as with each other, we kept up with group text, email, et cetera. So those were our most urgent needs, and that's how we handled that.
Thank you. And Stuart.
Yeah, I think, on our campus, probably the library wasn't that we didn't have a lot of urgent needs probably from the library as much as definitely the spring break time. It was a big scramble on the campus level to get all the classes into our D2L environment. I think all the classes existed, a shell existed for all the classes, but a lot of professors weren't using any aspects of it. And a lot of them were unfamiliar with it and resistant to it. So, but we were able to get 100% of our classes up and functioning in the D2L environment for the remainder of the semester. I think a lot of professors probably simplified their assignments. If they had a research assignment, they probably, change their syllabus or change their expectations for that semester, and kind of just wanted to help. The students were scrambling, faculty were scrambling, so in the library we really didn't hear a lot about the needs that weren't being filled, and as I said earlier, our students do already rely on our electronic resources, which are we're always available.
Great, thank you. Now let's talk about day-to-day activities during the pandemic. Were there any programs or things that you implemented in your library that you'd like to share with us? We'll start with Michael on this one.
We were doing electronic reserves and physical reserves prior to the pandemic. Had to cut out physical reserves entirely. So this was sort of a test case sort of semester that we got to use. It was really exciting in a way. We had been sort of pushing Legato for a while, but now there was really a big chance to sort of communicate, this will make your life easier at a time when your life is very, very hard. If you're an instructor, you're having to come up with completely new ways to teach. Also, we actually put 2 pickup services plans in place. At my library, we served a community of users that were not necessarily affiliated with the university. So the custom form that we used for pickup service at most of the other libraries, those users couldn't authenticate. So at our library, we had to go ahead and use Alma because those users outside the university could authenticate with that. So it was nice to trial two things. Also, we found out using the pick from shelf list, we didn't like that we had to refresh the list every time throughout the day, but we did like that we could use our entire staff, all our student employees to pull things, all our student employees to deliver things to faculty members. We currently use Iliad for faculty delivery. We now also have sort of the option, should we choose to use it, of just using Alma for faculty delivery to allow requests on available items through Alma and just stay in one system. But that's going to be a hard sell.
Great, thank you. Daniel.
I thought we did a pretty good kind of it's probably not terribly unique amongst libraries, but a appointment only kind of pickup service where we just added a little tweak to our Alma notices where if it was a branch that was open to curbside pickup, they'd get an extra link in there, your book is ready, please click here, and it would pass them on to LibCal to schedule your pickup, and then they'd go and grab it. We've since wound it down, I think, but it was pretty nifty at the time.
Thank you. Deyse?
So when we came back on campus in the fall, we did implement a couple of changes. One was we started using the reservation system of our books that is built into Primo, where we go ahead and pull the books for our patrons. Since our stacks were closed just because of social distancing reasons and cleaning, etc., we were able to offer that service. We hadn't offered it before because we are a very small campus. We're a small library, and we just didn't feel like we had enough people working to be able to constantly pull books. But there was no way around that. And it's actually something that has worked well and that people like. So we are going to keep doing it. Another thing that we tried was the contactless check-in for our study rooms. So usually our study rooms are locked and people have to go to the front desk to get someone to open it for them so that they can check in and so that we know they've come. Well, with COVID, we wanted to, limit all that contact. And so we tried a contactless system where they would check in with a QR code and then the doors would be open. And that's how we knew that the room was occupied. That didn't work very well because they just let themselves into the room without checking in, which means that their reservations got canceled after 15 minutes, which means that it was available for somebody else. And anyway, we had to stop that in the middle of the semester and go back to our traditional way of having to check in students to the study room. There wasn't too much contact involved, but it's something that we tried that just didn't work for our community.
Okay, great. Stuart?
So Tennessee Tech took a pretty aggressive approach to reopening. So after that spring semester where we were closed from spring break to the end of the semester, we reopened. All staff were back on campus during the month of June 2020. Everybody, kind of had a phased return, but by the end of June, everybody was back on campus. Students, we had a lot of online classes, but the library was open for we were fully open again, all services restored starting in the fall semester. We did reduce the number of seats in the library. So we stored 600 of our chairs and, but the only thing we couldn't distance was our tutoring. So we run tutoring for a lot of classes out of the library. And so we switched to online tutoring for that. And that was really the only new, kind of change that we really made. We have a testing center in the library as well. And we reopened that in the fall with distanced seating. And so we can normally hold, 50 plus people in there, but we we identified certain certain places, testing stations where they would be distanced. And so I can't remember if it was 6 or 8, but it was severely limited availability for the testing center.
Great, thank you. Andrea?
Yeah, so before the pandemic, we did a very bustling physical reserves service, but again, like others, we had to discontinue that during the pandemic due to it being very high touch. So we did institute e-reserves, which we were able to do really, really quickly. And so that was great. We were able to get chapters up of textbooks for students to access via our catalog. We have a special, reading list section for e-reserves and our physical reserves. So that was really good. And that is something that we are probably going to continue. We added Overdrive and started collecting academic books through Overdrive, and then marketed that through our liaison programs to faculty, which is something we're going to keep. We did institute contactless materials pickup, just using the hold system in Alma, which we used before. Students or faculty or staff could put holds on items, so we just continued to use that system. But instead, when holds came through, we went and pulled the book, checked it out to the patron, and then left it with no identifying information on who the book was for, except for the last 4 of their student ID number, and left it on a card outside the library. So that's how we handled that, and it went really well. Students were also able to return any materials via the entrance to our campus. There is a guardhouse, and that is where campus police were checking people into campus. So students were able to return their materials there if they wanted to, so they wouldn't even really have to come on to campus. And then we also did some virtual events, but they didn't go very well. So we usually have stress relief week at the end of each semester. So we tried to do some virtual events, virtual meditation, virtual bring your pet hour, but they just weren't very well attended. So we're looking forward to doing events in person again.
Great, thank you. Another issue during the pandemic was physical activity and psychological mindfulness, So were there any programs or tips or tricks that kept your library staff healthy and productive during the pandemic? Daniel, we'll start with you.
Well, one of my colleagues, an archivist over in our special collections, would host a weekly kind of casual coffee hour chat every Friday. And I was sad I only got to catch it a couple times myself, but I found it to be a pretty enjoyable experience each time. And I think something else I just kind of, this is going way back into right around April now. I kind of got the impression as everybody kind of got accustomed to being on Zoom or Teams or whatever, and we all kind of saw, we all had different things going on in the background. We presenting dogs and doorbells and kids. And I think I feel like I have I mean, aside from the camaraderie of going through the harrowing experience of the pandemic, I don't know. It'll probably sound a little dramatic to say it kind of humanized everybody a little bit more, kind of seeing a bit behind the scenes of what they were going through too. But I found it to be pretty, I wish the circumstances were better, but it was kind of, and a lot of us we were really fortunate to be able to work from home, but it was, just a shared struggle kind of thing, I guess.
Great, thank you. Deyse.
So something that I did for my colleagues when we got back on campus that I think made a huge difference in their mental health was that I offered that we all take one day out of the week to work from home. And everyone took me up on that except for one person who just preferred to come in every day, and that was fine. So then they wouldn't have to worry about social distancing and wearing masks and keeping their door closed, etc. They can still be productive from home. And it worked really well. Everybody appreciated it. We're doing it through summer, and in the fall, we're going back to being here, all of us, every day, which nobody wants to do, including myself. We were enjoying the one day kind of peace, but we are kind of getting back to the norm here on our campus, and I want to be supportive of that. But it is something that we can possibly do in forthcoming summers, since we are not as busy during the summers. So I think that made a really big difference. I will say though, we're small, so I have a lot of contact with everybody on my staff all the time, and so I trust them to be able to do that and to be productive. I think it has to do with the dynamics in my library. So I don't know if that would work all around, but it worked really well for us. And I think it made a really big difference in our stress levels.
Thank you. Stuart.
So as I mentioned earlier, staff were working from home for only 9 weeks. And after that, we were back to face-to-face. Different staff had different concerns, different levels of concern about COVID. And certainly all of us were wearing masks and distancing, and some people kept their doors closed, some kept them open. But I think getting back together was probably helpful psychologically, rather than working at home. I found working at home to be very difficult. A lot of my job is with physical materials and supervising staff and things like that. And it was very difficult to be productive at home. So for me, there was a lot less stress, just being able to come back to the office, being able to work in the collection and those kinds of things.
Thank you. Andrea.
Okay, so I especially during the pandemic, productive was not in my vocabulary. That was not a concern, that we need to be productive. So the first priority was to survive a global health crisis. That was the first priority. Yay, we all made it. The second priority was to make sure that our students were served as closely as possible to pre-pandemic times. So again, right away, we added e-reserves. We serve students via our LibChat. Not only that, a couple of our librarians set up chat queues for all the other departments on campus. Advising, registration, everyone got a virtual office with their own chat queue so that they could serve students virtually. And the statistics on that over the past year have been astronomical, just thousands and thousands of questions answered via those chat queues. So that was amazing. We also did virtual research appointments, which actually worked even better maybe than in person. We're going to keep doing the virtual in addition to in person, but the really great thing about it was that we were able to set those up basically anytime. So during evenings or on weekends, we were able to set up appointments with students to help them with their research. So it was just that flexibility was really nice. I think flexibility is become my new keyword. So that was great. We also we moved all of our instruction online. And one of the best things about it was, again, I think somebody else mentioned earlier that their embedded librarian program grew. So ours did as well. And I was personally able to experiment with setting up a tutorial for students to take before I came in for instruction, which really worked well. So going to continue to do that as well. Physically, we were able to keep the computer lab in the library open. At one point, So we were set up to do appointments for students in our computer lab. And at one point we had them making appointments 24 hours in advance so that we would be able to set up staff to be here. So our main phone line, we actually would take turns forwarding it to our cell phones. We only answered it during, our typical opening hours. But we did do that so that we could, still serve students who were calling us. And to keep staff, healthy and in contact and improving their mental health. Again, we had our internal chat queue on Lib Answers, so we were able to, chat with each other and ask each other questions. And we also had some virtual coffee breaks and even some virtual happy hours. So it was a good time.
Great. Thank you. Michael.
Teams was really sort of a lifesaver at the beginning of the pandemic, and we really used it heavily. But I think we had to learn at a certain point. It's also sort of an interruption machine, and it can be overused. And we had to learn how to sort of back off with Teams or just use it at certain times of the day. It also about it was many months in. We should have done it earlier. But I think in the access services group, we had to sort of recognize that we passed burned out 2 months ago. So I think once we got to sort of talk about that and acknowledge that and maybe be a little bit less ambitious about cleanup projects and documentation projects and training and things like that, we just had to step back a bit. We had a lot of folks that were, their main function was maintaining physical inventory or the oversight of physical inventory. So it was good to have a lot of those migration cleanup projects that are still sort of hanging around. A lot of ex libris training, and we're still working on documentation. It was good to have digital projects for those folks to work on, and maybe they'll develop new skills and we can continue with that. Our faculty, I think this is across the library system, they come in to ask questions, but they also sort of come in to check in, and during those sort of long conversations, you can sort of suss out what their needs are, but they also want to say hi. So we discovered that we needed to facilitate those sort of interactions. They'll usually contact us if there's a really big emergency, but they didn't want to bother us. So it's good to check in. We found out that it's good to check in with faculty every now and then and just say, we're here. We're really good at this electronic reserve stuff. So if you need help, please let us know.
Thank you. Now we want to look at our reflections over this past 16 months. Is there any services that you rapidly implemented in response to the pandemic that you want to keep when we transition into the post-pandemic era? This time we'll start with Deyse.
I think the hold system that I mentioned before for our materials really worked well for us. So we are going to keep that going. We did transition to electronic reserves only, and we are not going to be limiting that as much, but we will be promoting that more than our physical reserves, just because students use that more, first of all, and it's more convenient for everybody. We do have some more traditional professors that still would like the print reserves, and that's fine. But I do think that's something that worked really well for us. And regarding our research coaching sessions, our one-on-one reference with librarians, we always, not always, but in the last few years, we did offer online sessions as well, even before the pandemic. But that was at a minimum. That was mostly reserved for our distance learning students or, a grad student maybe. But it has worked really well, and we will keep offering online research coaching appointments. So students will always have the option of either doing it online through Zoom or face-to-face. So those are the things that we will try to maintain.
Thank you. Stuart?
So Tennessee Tech was only closed for that spring 2020, the end of the semester. So we really didn't implement any new services that we would want to keep, and we just resumed services in the summer. And other than obviously we'll put all the chairs back this fall. Looking forward to having the library full again. We were operating around, in the fall semester, around 40% of our normal volume. And in the spring semester, it was even lower than that, about 30% of our normal volume of students. Part of that was reduced seating. And also we had a lot of our study rooms were being used as offices due to buildings on campus and moving staff around. But so we're looking forward to having everything back open this fall, and having the library very much back to normal.
Thank you. Andrea?
So yeah, I've mentioned a couple already, but we will continue to offer research appointments and instruction virtually, especially for our non-traditional students. We do have quite a few adult students here at Chat State, and with Tennessee Reconnect, that has only grown. So we will definitely keep those. We also implemented a chat schedule. So before the pandemic, we would just be signed into LibChat whenever we were in our office, but now we have a schedule to ensure that there's even coverage and that there's at least one librarian available on chat in case of reference questions. And we will keep our e-reserves as well. As Deyse said, students really like those. So we're gonna keep that.
Great, thank you. Michael?
Yeah, I think we're going to try our best to always offer electronic reserves via physical rather than physical reserves. I'm sure there's going to be holdouts, but really the students, I think, prefer it. I heard in a presentation that one library had rebranded reserves as reading list to really put the focus on legato. We're still in discussion about that, if that's something that we'd like to do. I think we're also in discussion about pickup service. We're wondering if it will scale later. Getting the staff to pull items from the shelves is not always going to be possible at all libraries. And we want to be really careful about offering service at one library that we don't want to offer at all libraries. So discussion is still forthcoming.
Great, thank you. And Daniel?
Well, we were already kind of looking at getting rid of a lot of our daily overdue fines anyway, when everything kind of turned on its head, and we phased those out during the pandemic. So I'm glad we'll be able to keep those. Like, we'll still, if you lose something, you're still on the hook for it, but we won't do the daily accruals anymore for non-reserve stuff. But other than that, I'd love to get ETAS back in some way that was a little less E and T. Just a real quick for the folks who didn't use it. It was it's tricky because it offers direct digital access to stuff that's still in copyright. And so once our buildings open back up, we had to turn it off. But it would be great if I could get that back in some way that is legally acceptable to all parties, assuming such a thing is even possible.
Yeah. Let's hope we don't have to go through another pandemic.
Yeah.
All right. Next question. Are there any specific changes to the system regarding ALMA that you found to be very useful? Are there any features of the ALMA or Primo that are helpful when your library deals with emergency situations? Are there any enhancement functions that you'd like to have on the system for the future? We'll start with Stuart this time.
Actually, I'm going to pass on that question.
All right. Andrea?
Okay, so yeah, Alma and Alma Primo was very helpful with, again, we used our existing hold system to be able to pull materials for students so that we could have contactless delivery. That was really helpful. Also, our e-reserves. Sorry, I just lost my train of thought. Our e-reserves was really, really easy to add and to make accessible and searchable through our one-click search, which is, our generic library search. So those two especially come to mind as being very, very helpful.
Great, thank you. Michael?
I'm going to go into the things I wished we had. Using the pick from shelf list, again, we didn't like refreshing the browser every 20 minutes. We really like desktop alerts or emails or something like that. I'd really like, the reason a lot of libraries didn't want to use the pick from shelf list is because they wanted to receive those requests via LibAnswers. So if there was good LibAnswers integration, I know that SpringShares was working on that, but it didn't do everything that we needed it to do. If that could be solved later, that would really help us out. Tao Yu, one of our systems librarians, she made tons and tons of bulk due date changes, moving things forward. She made a lot of quick changes to our letters and our notices. That was handy to have. One function that I really liked is the ability to duplicate a fulfillment unit and make small temporary changes, move all your locations there, and then when your pandemic ends, whenever that's going to be, you can just move everything back, and you haven't broken anything. Hopefully.
Great, thank you. Daisy, we'll go with you next.
I actually would have said the same as Andrea and the same as Michael. I really like the hold system. It's worked really well for us. The e-reserves are also easy. But as Michael said, the pick from shelf, it's good, but we do have to refresh it, and we do have to remind our student workers, hey, did you check that in the last 4 hours? Oh, no, you didn't. Okay, let's check that. So if there was some sort of desktop notification, that would make things a lot easier.
Daniel?
Yeah, I could almost probably fill this whole session just talking about Alma Primo stuff. Like Alma and analytics, like Michael said, some of the work Tao did, we found it really useful to pair Alma and analytics together to identify sets of folks that needed their records changed or extended, or items that needed their policies changed, just all sorts of big, like with the fines, we knocked out like 16,000 transactions automatically in an afternoon just by chugging through the APIs. It was with a set from analytics. So that was really useful. And then on the Primo side too, just being able to get into like the customization package and add the Hothy links. We already had the browsing links, which were really handy, system alerts and just stuff like that. So we got great use out of those platforms, trying to keep services up and running in the new electronic capacity.
Great, thank you. And the last question that we have is, technology played a vital role to keep the library delivering services, such as video conferencing or cloud storage. How is your staff's readiness in adapting to new technologies? And are there any future plans to improve staff technological skills? Andrea, we'll start with you.
Thank you. So there's different levels of comfort among staff with technology, but the vast majority of us are very comfortable with technology. As others have said, our library already had a very strong online presence in many ways. And I think that really helped us to transition very quickly. And again, most of us were already comfortable. There were some things that we had to do some training on. For example, in LibChat, you can request for whoever you're helping to share their screen so that you can kind of, take them through things. So, so that's just one example. But whenever we would get common questions from staff, how do I do this? How do I do that? I would just offer virtual training in WebEx, which is what our school uses. And again, I was able to share my screen and people could follow along and try things out on their own screens. So virtual training was actually really great. And I think I'm going to continue to offer both in-person and virtual training for the staff and our student assistants. So we'll be doing that regularly. But again, most of us, you know, we're able to get through that really well. Any future plans to improve our staff technological skills? Always. There's always something new to learn. So yes, we will continue to improve upon that. We're going to continue in some cases to have virtual meetings, you know, for staff that may not be working on campus that day or whatever the case may be. So yeah, we're going to continue to do that as well.
Great. Thank you. Michael.
I think I'll start with the challenges for us right now. We're facing pandemic fatigue, and we were at the tail end of migration fatigue. So we have to talk about potential changes to Alma again from things that we learned during the pandemic, or I think there's a general sort of feeling that we just want to get back to normal, but we really need to sort of reflect at this point. I think as this was going to happen anyway, but when you've got a lot of staff that are used to managing physical inventory, they need to sort of transition to managing your entire collection, get used to the use of that electronic content. And this was sort of a crash course in getting physical item managers used to finding out about everything that's available to them. And because we have pretty robust digital projects, we have a TV news archive. At music, we have a School of Music database. We really got to, a lot of staff learned a lot of new skills during the pandemic, and I hope we can continue with that.
Great. Daniel?
Yeah, I was really pleased how I think we generally have some pretty open-minded folks in our system, but everybody was pretty willing to learn all these new tools and figure out Zoom and maybe finally get figure out SharePoint and all this stuff that suddenly became real day to day. And I think I've said that I think some of them maybe were more eager because they were so freaked out about just, you know, that they were just lucky to have, they felt lucky to be able to keep their jobs and work from home and all that. But everybody, you know, it was great. And I do see as we're kind of transitioning to get more people back on campus, I'm seeing a real nice push toward normalizing hybrid meetings more and keeping folks familiar with the tools needed to collaborate that way we don't have to have everybody back on campus at the same time. And I kind of had to laugh too at seeing cloud storage and adapting so close to each other, because I also just recently learned that our Google Apps for Education account, we're going to have to rein it in a little bit, because apparently, or supposedly, a few other institutions decided to see just how unlimited the unlimited storage was. And so Google's trying to rein it in a bit. And they're asking us to come down from like 2.4 petabytes. And we're not even one of the big offenders, down to, I don't know, I don't remember the exact quote, but they're asking. So if any of y'all are using Google Apps for Education, maybe check on your institution's cloud storage. You might need to rein it in a bit.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Okay. Daisy?
Well, whether people are ready or not to adapt to new technologies, I think it comes with the day and time, and, you know, not even COVID, but just being in the 21st century and being librarians, we have to be open to new technologies all the time. And we also have to be open to training and motivating our professors to want to utilize those systems as well, which I think is a challenge. One system that we did have to learn in short notice was Zoom Webinar, which is quite different from normal Zoom, because this year was our library's 50th anniversary. and we had to do everything online, which was a blessing and a curse. I mean, it kind of made things different, but also we didn't have to, you know, engage so much with so many people coming in. So we did everything online. We had a celebration online. We made banners on our walls, but we also digitized them. And we had an event that was on Zoom webinar. Not only that, but we have a campus research day on our campus once a year. And we have a competitive component for Campus Research Day, as well as poster sessions and other sessions. But the competitive components were set in Zoom webinar. So some of our librarians were trained to be moderators in that platform, which was quite different from regular Zoom, but they were willing to do that, and now they know how to use it. So it's a good thing. Future plans to improve staff technological skills, like Andrea mentioned, always. We'll see what comes next.
Great, thank you. And Stuart.
Yes. Well, all of our staff needed to obviously learn Teams meetings, how to attend at least Teams meetings. But most of the technical challenges fell on those who have more technical jobs and more technical skills. So I don't think we really faced any particular challenges in that regard. One important change that the spring shutdown accelerated was our move from desktops to laptops with docking stations.
Yeah.
So now I have a laptop that I didn't have before, and it makes it a lot easier to attend conferences when I start attending conferences again, but also to work from home. You know, all I have to do is unplug my laptop, put it in the bag, which has its own power cord, and you know, I can just plug in at home and have access to all my files, which our campus is, I'm sure there's a nice way to say it, but I don't have time, you know, really overboard on security, and I'm all in favor of security, but basically it was locked down so tightly that we couldn't get into campus with with personal devices. So now that I have a university device, I can get in and use you know, my hard drive, as well as the campus resources, the shared folders. So that was an important transition, and that's true for all library faculty, staff, and administrators. We've all been transitioned to laptops and docking stations.
Thank you. Are there any comments from the other participants? I don't see any questions in chat. Go ahead.
Yeah, it's kind of a departure from the questions we've had in our discussion so far, but I did want to mention that as I've already mentioned, Tennessee Tech opened up in the fall, and we had students in the library starting in the fall. There was a requirement that everybody wear masks, but obviously mask wearing in Tennessee, they just didn't go together. So our students were very resistant to that. In the fall, we didn't have any way of really strictly enforcing that. And I did take statistics of our mask wearing in the library, and basically it amounted to 40% not wearing masks, 5% eating or drinking, so they weren't wearing a mask perhaps because they were eating or drinking. About 5% were wearing it below their noses, and another 50% were wearing a mask properly. And between semesters, our university administration looked at those statistics and said, that's not good enough. The library has to fix that. And so even though there were other places on campus, like the University Center across the street, where masklessness was far worse, they didn't have to do anything. But the library got the word that we had to fix this in the library. So we devised a plan to strictly enforce mask wearing, and it included removing students from the library for not wearing a mask. Students with that too low were given warnings, but students without masks were asked to leave the library. They were allowed to return immediately if they were wearing a mask, but they had to leave. They couldn't just put it on and say, okay, I'm good now, because they would just, as soon as the staff member walked away, they'd take it off. So they did have to go through the walk, to the front door, out the door, come in the other side. We had lots of signage. There was no question about what our expectations were. But over the course of the spring semester, we did remove over 400 students from the library. Some of them didn't come back. They were either embarrassed or, just didn't want to come back. So they gathered up their stuff and hit the door and left. Others came back immediately. Some of them took it in good humor. And, kind of like as soon as they were caught, they kind of laughed and, like, okay, you got me. So they left. We did have one student on whom we had to ask campus police to help us remove. He was not physically violent, but he wanted to discuss the philosophy of mask wearing, and that's not what we were willing to do. So we did have to get campus police involved in just one time. I just wanted to mention that because a lot of places didn't have that ability to actually remove students. And I've talked to staff about how frustrating it was to walk through the library and ask students to put masks on. And, you go through the library every hour or 2, 3, and the same students would be sitting in the same places and they would, again, not be wearing masks, but all you could do would be ask them to put a mask on. So we were, unfortunately, we did it only with volunteer staff to enforce the mask wearing. It was not, we didn't have it was just volunteers. We didn't ask students to do it. It was only staff, administrators, and faculty volunteers. And it was very effective. 99% of our students would be wearing masks so we would have 150 to 200 people in the library, and we would have to ask 1 or 2 to leave on any given day. So it was very effective in turning those numbers around from 40% maskless to, less than 1% maskless.
I know at Vanderbilt, we had a health ambassadors program that staff were encouraged to participate in. And basically, it gave us the authority to approach people who weren't wearing masks to tell them you need to put your mask on. And if they didn't, then we would contact Vanderbilt security, let them deal with it. Because like we weren't in that position to forcibly put the mask on them. I'm wondering, how did others approach the mask rule?
We had to police our areas a lot more than we ever did. We don't like to do that, but we were forced to do that this year. So a lot of walking around, telling students to pull their masks up, and they would usually. We didn't have much trouble except for one student that he argued with student workers, he argued with librarians, and we did have to call campus safety on him. And then the next time after that, he was compliant and he was wearing a mask. But administration wanted us to be really careful when we were implementing these rules because they were so worried about students' mental health as it was. And so we had to be really sensitive to that, but at the same time, we want to keep everyone healthy. And then a couple of other times we had to contact a dean to speak to the students, which is so silly when you think about it. I mean, it's just a mask, but as Stuart mentioned, Tennessee and masks don't really go together, I guess. I mean, I'm fine with them, but so, a little bit of an issue here and there, but what we really disliked was having to police our areas so much because we want our students to feel comfortable, and that's not the culture of this library.
Yeah, great.
Yeah, our president here at UK issued a special statement reminding people, please wear masks in the main library, just because our folks were making a great effort to, try and politely encourage students to please mask up, but we're were having a bunch of hard-headed folks. I don't think we had any major incidents, fortunately. I don't know if we had to call the police, but yeah, we did. There was a special letter from the president, please wear your mask at Willie T.
Mm. Wow.
There
Anybody
was
else?
actually a reporting app at Vanderbilt that was also an option of last resort. But our biggest challenge is the library's a gathering place, and students want to come there to feel normal. So we had more trouble with social distancing, and just trying to keep people far enough from the desk, because people want to visit and they want to say hi. But
Agreed.
Yep.
Yeah, we have these big wooden study tables that accommodate like 8 to 10 people, and it's just like that you were used to.
Mm-hmm.
For me, it was a challenge between making students feel welcome, like they could use the space, balancing that with the very real concerns that staff had about being exposed. So that was difficult to navigate. We, of course, required mask wearing in the library. One thing that we did, and again, traffic was we were not open to the extent that a lot of you others were, and we're also a community college, and so we're not residential. So classes is what really drives our students to campus. So we did not, have a huge amount of students in here like we normally do. But for the students that were here, it was definitely a, absolutely no tolerance policy about mask wearing. And we did have to call campus police when we would have students that would refuse to our polite requests to wear their mask properly. So that's definitely not what I wanted to do. But again, trying to balance, the library and library staff comfort. And so, yeah.
Great.
Yeah, we were very fortunate that our administration did not make us try to enforce distancing. So we had reduced the number of chairs in the library by 600, but chairs are very mobile. Some of them even have wheels. So students would push, our study tables, we just had 2 chairs at each of the study tables, but there were whole areas of the library that had no chairs. Some of the computers that you couldn't sit down, and certain computer labs, because all the chairs had gone into the seat into the other areas of the library, and it was just fruitless to try to push them all back every day or a couple times a day. So we only did that every once in a while, and but as I said, we weren't trying to enforce distancing, and mask wearing is a lot easier than trying to say you're 5 feet away instead of 6, or you're 4 feet away instead of 5, or whatever the requirement is. A mask is a pretty easy thing to evaluate.
Tal just posted a question. Are there big ideas you would have tried if you had the resources during the pandemic?
I know at Vanderbilt, books by mail was mentioned a lot of times, and it's just the expense would be immense. We had a lot of students that were caught in China. They still needed resources, but we couldn't arrange for the return of those materials, and we couldn't arrange for shipments of items that we didn't have digitally.
I would have made sure everyone had a laptop if I could. I know IT lent out laptops to students who didn't have their own, but they should have their own anyway. If I could have, I would have just bought everybody a laptop or a tablet.
A lot of our students came into the library due to a need to print things. This was something that probably we could have afforded, but just didn't come together, but having a mobile printing station outside of the library, so it wouldn't matter if the library was open or not. Students could come in and print or do whatever they needed to do on the computer outside of library hours. That would have been nice.
Something we've looked at Vanderbilt is a mobile cart where users can check out laptops. But there's like $25,000 a piece. So.
Yeah, we kicked around a bunch of hardware stuff like that, laptops and hotspots, and not just for students, but for some of our colleagues in the library system who had poor internet at home or something like that. And mail from home. Yeah, we have a lot of like the idea, like for years we've had this kind of distance learner classification, but of course last couple of years it's gotten real fuzzy. Well, what is a distance learner? And so we're looking at yeah, we would have liked to have done a lot of book mailing stuff right to folks' homes if we'd have been able to afford it.
Yeah. All right. Anybody else? Well, thank you everyone for attending today's session. I know you've sat through another 4 hours. I hope you have garnered something, and we look forward to seeing you again on Friday. So y'all have a good day.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
And remember to fill out the evaluation form for all the sessions you have attended. And thank you very much.
Thank you. Have a good one, everyone.
Yeah, thank you all for coming.